Hey everybody, this is the next in the series Getting It Done. In this segment we're going to be talking about exporting in Final Cut X. Exporting in Final Cut X is a very simple process, and it's all done basically in the background so that you can continue working on projects as you export. Now there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about before we export that you want to look at, and then I want to show you the basic process and series that you go through to make sure that you export your project correctly and that you know things like what resolution you're working with, what file type, and most importantly, what you're naming it and where it's going to be exported to. So let's take a look at some very important things right off the bat. First off, you want to make sure that you've actually finalized your project before exporting. What that means is that you have watched this project numerous times and it is exactly the way that you want it to be. One other thing you want to make sure of is that the duration at the bottom is exactly where you want it to be. Now a lot of students in particular kind of have a problem here because they may have something way down the timeline that they don't see, and they don't look at the duration. They just kind of look at where the end of their last intentional clip is. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. If I were to grab a clip and just drag it way down the timeline, let's just say I was editing, I was running through this process, and I'll show you how to do what I'm doing right now in a later tutorial, but I'm editing, I'm going through my process, and I've just been pushing clips down the timeline because I just keep inserting and inserting and inserting. This clip keeps getting pushed further and further and further down the timeline until it's way down here away from the rest of my project. I'm going to go back to my select tool, the one that you guys should all be using right now. Now, you've got your entire project here, and for most people who aren't really paying close attention, you'll notice that we still have this dark bar. Now this isn't the exact same bar that we were talking about or that we've used before with the magnetic toolbar. It's different, but it looks very similar, and a lot of people will look at that and go, well, my project ends at about 35 seconds, about 36 seconds. Well, that's not true. Your project actually ends at 1 minute and 23 seconds because you've got this extra clip, these extra pieces way down the timeline. So you, before exporting, need to make sure you look at your duration and make sure that you know that you actually have this cleaned off. Now, easy way of cleaning this off and making sure that you are exactly where you need to be, if you see that you've got these extra clips, simply highlight them by using the selection tool, drawing a box over them, and then hitting the delete key on your keyboard. You'll notice now the duration is back to 36. I have nothing else in this magnetic timeline, and I'm good to go. Alright, now the other thing you want to check on before you export is what's called your VU meters. Now, we're going to have another section that just talks about audio later on, but a good thing to look at are these bouncing bars right here. And you can break them off simply by clicking right there to where you actually will have the larger bars on the right. It's a good idea to go through and make sure that you've got fairly even audio all the way through. You're going to be looking for audio that bounces somewhere between generally -6 and 0. I like to get it just bouncing over -6 decibels. That's a good place generally for most actual audio. Now there's things like hums and pops that you may want lower than that, but generally speaking you want around -6 for good solid audio. Once you've checked that, the duration and the audio and the fact that your clips are exactly as they need to be, now you're ready to actually export. So let's go ahead and do that. To export, you're going to go to File, and then you're going to go to Share. Now, I want to make sure you pay attention to this. You do not export the XML. This is a data file. You want to stay away from this. You want to go to Share and then export the master file. Share master file. And you'll get a screen that looks like this. Now, info gives you all the basic info. You can actually name your sequence there. And you can go to settings and change things up. I would suggest that you use the H.264 codec. That's a good mixture of speed and quality. It's also not a gigantic file size. I like to make sure that I'm using a QuickTime Movie file format, and we want to make sure that the resolution in this case is 1920 by 1080. That's a high def resolution, and we want to make sure that we're using something like that. So this is what we're using at SFA. You should be using something very similar to that if you're one of our students. Okay? You also can check out down here at the bottom, make sure that your resolution, frame rates are correct, that you're getting both left and right channels, not just a mono exporting. You can check out your bit rate for your audio, your full duration again, and finally your file size to see how big this file is. If you see this file size as something that seems odd to you, for example, if you've done 2-minute videos before and they're generally like 300 megabytes, and all of a sudden you see one that's several gigabytes, you know you've got one of your settings wrong and you need to go back in and take a look at that. For example, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 students every semester using our edit bays, so things occasionally do get changed. Just keep an eye on this before you export, and it's a good barometer of whether or not your settings are correct. Here everything looks good, so I can hit next. And here we go ahead and we check to make sure that everything is correct. Name and location. What are we calling it? Where are we saving it? Once we make sure that those things are correct, we hit save and we're good to go. Now, if you go to background tasks under Window, Background Tasks, you'll see a window pop up that will give you basically the progress of your export. If you don't want to look at this, you can look at this little circle right there. That will give you the same thing. Now, we can have your, there's several ways you can basically set up the export to give you kind of cues when it's done. Mine will actually give me a little message that pops up at the right here. You'll see in just a second that will say your project is done. I like setting it up in our edit bays to actually give you a full screen movie pop-up so that you can review your movie one more time or your package one more time before you turn it in. But basically you want to make sure that you see that your project is done, just like this, and you know that your project is ready to go. I would suggest you always watch it one more time, make sure the duration is correct. Ignore that. Make sure that the duration is correct. Play through it one more time, and then you can submit it to your client, your professor, or whomever. That's all there is, guys. Nothing major to exporting. And I'll see you back here for the next in the Getting It Done series.